What's up, y'all? It's Chad, and I want to ask you a question about this book that I have been reading. I'm a pastor here in North Louisiana. I make videos with the Bible, the spiritual life, and the everyday life of a pastor. And I've been, for the last few weeks, reading Karl Barth's book, the Epistle to the Romans. Now, there's different ways to pronounce his last name. He's a Swiss theologian, mid-20th century, possibly one of the most theologically important pastors of the 20th century. And I've never really read him that much. In seminary, we'd had these things called readers, which was like a larger book or a packet of articles or excerpts, that sort of a thing. But I really had never read Barth until the last few weeks. And this is how it happened. So this is an NLT filament scripture journal. And I said in an earlier video that I was going to do a more in-depth review of this whole series and set. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do a deeper read into the book of Romans to just really like fill up this thing and get this engaged. Now, I know I'm all right with Romans. I've not read it as much as I've read other books in the New Testament, like 1st and 2nd Peter, and the book of Revelation, and the Gospel of John, the book of Acts. Like, those are my bread and butter. And also some books in the Old Testament. But anyway, even with like a medium level of an understanding pastorally of Romans, I could still take an hour-long Bible study and walk people through Romans and why it's intriguing and all that. But I said, hey, I'm going to go do a deeper read. I feel like it's theologically making us ask some really important questions, and I want to just take the time to do that. So I'm like in chapter 2, maybe early on, and I had some questions, and so I said, hey, Chad, you've got questions about the Bible. Besides your theological training, you also have the giant wall of books back there. So let's go pull out a commentary and see what it says about things. And for some reason, I decided to not go to the other works I had on Romans and instead picked up this old copy of Barth's Epistle to the Romans. I'll tell the story about why this volume is special and matters at the end of the video. But I go to the passage that I was curious about, and I instantly realized this doesn't look like a normal commentary. This is reading different. This is looking different. And like, it's like this. Like, so if I pull out F.F. Bruce's book. Oh, this is, I thought this was Romans. This is the book of Acts, but I've got the Nikon volume back there on Romans or other books on Romans. If you look at any more of an academic commentary, what you're going to find is you're going to find Greek language work. You're going to have discussion over the structure of the passage. You're going to have references back to previous passages. You're going to have sociocultural information. You're going to have historical information, all those sorts of things. And here I am saying, okay, Karl Barth, one of the most tremendous theologians of the 20th century, highly theologically influential, and his commentary, or what I was calling commentary, is not reading whatsoever at all like a commentary. So this is the question I want to ask. And if you've read Barth that much, I would love to have you engage with me in the comments, because this is my question. Is this a book or is this a commentary? Because the way it reads, now he has his own translation of Romans inside of here. I kind of want to find a full version of just his translation of Romans. That would be really interesting to read. But it reads kind of devotional. It reads like deeply theological. I mean, it's a pretty complex book. But it still reads devotionally, like it's inspiring in the way a devotional of some sort is. And it was translated from the original language into English. So Swiss or German, one of those two things. And there's King James English in it. Whoever translated decided to put the these and the thous and the thuses and that kind of stuff. So you have to read around some older, more antiquated, more formal English to do so. But like, I'm reading this passage in chapter 2, the back end of chapter 1, wherever it was, and I'm just like, it turns into a devotional moment, like completely a devotional moment. And so I go back to the beginning of Romans 1 in Barth, and then Romans 1, where it started in the Filament Scripture Journal. And I started reading more and more. And the next thing I know, like, I've done all of chapter 1. I've been in it for like an hour and a half. I'm back and forth engaging and making notes in other places and writing on note cards, which is one of the weird things I've started doing again. And ultimately I realized I'm just going to read these two things side by side. And that's going to be a nighttime devotional activity for me over the next couple of months. Because, like, I have a lot of commentaries. I read a lot of commentaries. Very rarely is a commentary inspiring at a deeply spiritual level. It's a lot of times it's technical reading or research reading for me. And so for somebody who has is pretty unfamiliar with Barth, I've actually tracked down five hardback copies from his Summa Theologica, which is his big, huge magnum opus of systematic theology. And all seminary professors actually sending me his copies, which belong to a previous seminary professor, and I had both of them. So that's kind of cool and special. And that leads me into the story behind this volume. So some of you know this, but I talk about it sometimes. But my dad spent 44 years as a Southern Baptist pastor. Yes, I'm a United Methodist now. That's a completely different story, but oddly related to this story. So my dad's church is unique in the fact that since like 1970 or so, there have only been 3 senior pastors at this church. Dad was there for 18 years as the youth minister under a senior pastor named John Alley. I grew up calling him Big John because he lived down the street. He was like a surrogate grandfather in a lot of ways. But no, Big John spent 25 years, I think, as a senior pastor, 30 years senior pastor. My dad was 18 years in youth ministry, and then a 4-year transition phase. This is back in the 90s when nobody did this kind of stuff. And then spent 22 plus years as senior pastor. He retired a couple years ago. The pastor of that church now grew up at that church, went away, but he's been on staff for like 10 years. And it's not just the senior pastor. Almost all of the pastoral staff at this church stay there for an extremely long time, if not their whole career. So there have been times before when I've picked through Dad's books and I've noticed that Dad had an older book that belonged to Big John. And I would just kind of take it because Dad didn't like the older books and the more technical books. And it was Big John's. And so, yeah, I'm going to take this. This is a cool book. I've got a first edition copy of The Pursuit of God that belonged to Big John, A.W. Tozer, and I've got a second printing copy of Knowledge of the Holy that belonged to Big John. So both of those are kind of special because also I love A.W. Tozer. So anyway, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when Dad was retiring, I went to pick through his library for the last time, and his secretary was like pointing me towards like newer, more well-known, kind of popular level, Christian reading. And I wasn't interested in it. I finally told her, and I've known her my whole life too. And I was like, hey, listen, I just want the old, boring stuff. That's what I'm looking for. And I found this copy, and I brought it home with me. I brought home a whole box of books. I might have had a video. I'll see if I have a video about that, kind of the unboxing of the box of books. And I'll point that up there in the description. But this copy belonged to Big John. And I can tell from the notes, because there's notes in this book, that they're not my dad's handwriting, they're Big John's handwriting. And this was published in Oxford over in England in 1957. Big John has an inscription at the front of it. He bought it in 1960. So he was fairly young. He was younger than I am now when he bought it. And I can tell from the underlining and notes, it's not my dad's notes because my dad's handwriting is completely unintelligible, that they're Big John's notes. And since I have several of Big John's books, I know Big John's handwriting. And so it's really cool that I have this book that, for the moment right now is incredibly theological, fruitful for me to think about. And it belonged to a former mentor of mine. So that's the story about this particular edition and volume. I'm trying to keep it in really good condition as I read it. So I'm only using a pencil and not an ink pen. But if you know Barth, and if you've read this and you have an opinion on, is this a commentary or is this a book? I'd love to hear from you and engage with you in the comments below. So I'm Chad. I'll be back in the next video, but let's hang out and let's talk about, the difference between a book and a commentary and what that might mean for you. So thanks so much, and I will see you back in the next video.